Photoshop. At long last, we are at my favorite part of the process. We're getting ready to take our images from ordinary to extraordinary. So, enough talk, more photography. All right, friends, welcome to Photoshop. At long last, we have reached the end of the line in our digital photography workflow. Now, as you can see, we're going to be working on a nice portrait from Ashley and the yellow dress, and we'll be using a technique called frequency separation to do a little bit of skin retouching to make this image just absolutely perfect. Now, frequency separation is a bit of a new technique, but it has quickly become the new standard for retouching skin. It's a little bit of a complex process. We're going to do the process here, and I'm not going to take a lot of time to delve into why all of these things work. We can actually get bogged down into the technical weeds pretty quickly if we start explaining every little detail behind frequency separation. But if you're interested in learning more about frequency separation, we do have a free tutorial at premiumlightacademy.com. Just navigate to our free tutorial section and check out frequency separation for beginners. That might not be the best title per se, because frequency separation is not exactly a beginner technique when it comes to Photoshop, but Photoshop is a vast program. There are a lot of tools, there are a lot of techniques, and you can quickly blur the lines between beginner techniques, intermediate techniques, and advanced techniques when it comes to skin retouching. So in this situation, just follow along. We're going to do a step-by-step process that should get this image really nice and tight in no time at all. So first thing I'm going to do is head over to my layers palette over here. We've got our single flattened background image. This is basically the Photoshop document that was exported out of Lightroom. And the first thing I'm going to do is double click this and rename the background layer to original. Now, this original file is something that we should never touch. Never edit your original. Always keep your original file intact. This is important because you always want to have a baseline that you can return to. You may make a whole bunch of edits to this file, and then weeks later, the client may say, hey, I don't really like the way that turned out, can you redo it? In which case you say, yeah, of course, but you always want to make sure that you have the original file completely unscathed, so that just in case you have to start back from square one and undo a bunch of your edits, you have the original raw pixel data that you're working with that hasn't been manipulated. All right, so let's launch right into our frequency separation skin retouching. The first thing I'm going to do is make a copy of this layer. On the keyboard, I'm just going to hit Command J. That'll make one copy. I'm going to do it again. Now I have 3 identical copies of my original file. Top one, we're going to rename this one texture. And the one below it, we're going to rename this one color. The way frequency separation works is that it segregates or divides color information from texture information. Now, in a photograph, people's skin is made up of both color and texture. And what we want to do is we want to set up a system that enables us to edit the color separately from the texture. This will all start to make a little bit more sense as we dive in. So first, let's turn our texture layer off and focus on our color layer. What I want to do here, when we zoom in, we can start to see that Ashley has very good skin for one thing, so that's going to make our job quite a bit easier. But there is a little bit of tonal fluctuation going on here. I can see a little bit of highlight kind of coming in right here on her cheek. There's a little bit of highlight coming in on her nose. There's a little bit of shadow differentiation happening all around here. Down on her chin, there's a little bit of variation going on. And what we want to do is just kind of smooth that out, make this more of a beauty portrait. So I'm going to go up to my filter section and I'm going to grab a basic Gaussian blur. So when we open up this little dialog box here, I have a filter which enables me to make the picture really blurry if I move it all the way to the right, and not so blurry if I move it all the way to the left. Now what we want to do here is we basically just want to kind of get this going just enough that we can start to blur some of the tones in her skin together so that they're not really separating out that much. So right here around 9.5 pixels, and this is going to be different according to every image that you shoot. If you shoot a really up close portrait, you're probably going to need a little bit more blur. If you shoot a far away picture, you're going to need a little bit less blur. In this case, it looks like 9.5 pixels is going to start to smooth out her skin a little bit as far as the color variation goes. Now, obviously, we can't just blur out her skin and then airbrush this back in. That's going to look ridiculous, but that's okay. This is just the first step. So let's click OK right here and change that edit. So now our color layer has a bit of a blur to it. If I move the eyeball off of this, I'm looking at my original file underneath. color layer now has a blur. So let's go up to texture. And in this layer, we haven't manipulated this just yet. So we're gonna go up to the top here and grab image. And we're gonna go down and select apply image right here. This is gonna bring up yet another dialog box. And what we wanna do here is we wanna make sure that we are targeting the correct layer. Right now, this layer says merged, which means that this particular effect is applied to all of the layers below it. We don't want that. We just want to target the layer that says color. So I'm going to click that. And basically what's just happened here, I want to make sure that my blending mode is on subtract. Quite oftentimes this will default to a different blending mode. As you can see, I cycle up through here and they all do a little bit of a different effect. But when I go to subtract, this basically gives me kind of a texture map of the face. Photoshop has extracted all of the color information out of this image, and we're left only with the texture, which is created by variations in contrast and tonality. As I come over here, I can still kind of see the texture in Ashley's skin. I can see the contours of her face, the shape of her eyes, her lips, all that stuff, but I am now missing all of the color information. So what frequency separation does is it separates the texture information from the color information. All of these settings here, once we hit into our subtract blending mode, scale is 2, offset is 128. These are basically just algorithmic numbers that the engineers figured out a long time ago. Don't mess with them, leave them exactly as they are. So we're gonna click OK, and we now have this weird color gradient map sitting on top of our other images. So over here in our layers palette, I'm gonna click on my texture layer and I'm gonna give this an adjustment layer. When I come all the way down to linear light, basically, I click on this and everything looks like it goes back to normal. It literally looks exactly the same as we started. So we're combining an apply as texture layer to this color layer. We have separated the color in Ashley's skin from the texture in Ashley's skin, and this will enable us to edit these two things separately. So the first thing that we're gonna do, I'm gonna click on my color layer and I'm going to grab a lasso tool. And I'm going to set my feather to about 15 pixels. That should be good. That's going to give me a nice feathered edge here. And I'm going to start going around Ashley's face a little bit. I'm going to select kind of a region. Let's start off with her cheek right here and go up kind of around her nose. And I'm going to kind of create this region right here. And what I want to do is I want to go back up to my Gaussian blur tool. So let's grab our filter and let's look for blur, Gaussian blur. And what this is going to do is this is going to enable me to really start to level out those tones. So watch what happens. If I come all the way back, the tones in her skin have a lot of variation. You can see that highlight kind of popping out where some of the oils in her skin are getting a little bright. And then you've got this section is a little bright, this section is a little darker. There's kind of a little bit of blotchiness going on. And there's a huge variation between the highlights in her cheek and the shadows in her cheek. So as I move my pixel radius and blur this out a little bit, let's move it all the way to the top. As you can see, we've basically flattened out all of her skin and made it completely monotone. So that's obviously way too much. But as I come back in here into the maybe 9 to 12 to 15 point range, you can see that that skin is already starting to soften out. The tonality is starting to soften out. Now I no longer have these harsh highlights up here, and I no longer have quite such a harsh shadow down here. When I click the preview button on and off, watch what happens. This is nice and smooth, and without the effect, I've got a much kind of blotchier looking skin going on. All of the highlights, all of the oils in her skin have started to fluoresce, and the shadows are a little bit darker. But when I turn the preview back on, this stuff starts to level out, and we really start to get this nice soft effect. So I'm going to click OK. All right, we're going to deselect that region, Command D on the keyboard, and I'm going to go pick a different region in her face. Let's go down on her chin here a little bit, highlight a little bit of color information down here, go back up to our effects panel, grab a filter, and once again, I'm going to go into the Gaussian blur. And the previous blur that I used seems to be starting to hit around the magic number. I think I'm going to dial this one back just a little bit. So if we go all the way back, you can see the tonality taking shape in her face. And as I kind of move forward, we're really smoothing those tones together and giving that a nice looking effect. You don't want to overdo it. Again, if you overdo it, you completely flatten out all of the light in her face and you just get a monochromatic edit. So don't go too far on this. I'm going to try to stay subtle. If we go too much and we start to blur out, we're basically going to blur out the shape of her face. I mean, we don't want to blur out the bone structure of her face. Right now she's starting to lose a little bit of her chin. So let's dial that back just a little bit. And right around, I think 12 is going to give us a good number. So again, preview, let's toggle that on and off. Here's before, here's after. That's a very subtle change, maybe a little bit more. Let's go up to 15 and call it good. Click OK, deselect. Maybe let's kind of go into her nose region a little bit here. I want to avoid areas of high contrast. I wouldn't want to apply this effect on top of her eye where she has, you know, her eyelashes and her iris are all very sharp contrast. We want to stay in the areas of low contrast, which is basically the smoothness of her skin. So we have a pretty strong variation in between this little highlight going down her nose and the rest of her skin here. So once again, filter, go down to our blur effect, grab our Gaussian blur, and we've already started with that initial set to really kind of start to smooth that section out. Maybe just a tad bit more right there. That's a good edit. Click OK. We can go up into her forehead. There's not a great deal of tonal variation happening in her forehead, but we'll kind of smooth this section out just because we can. So filter, blur, get back into our Gaussian blur. Yep, as you can see, we'll toggle that on and off. And it just kind of, it smooths out the tonal variations. It really kind of makes the light on her face look like this. It's been made by this beautiful softbox, which it has because we shot Ashley in the shade. So the light on her face was really good quality to begin with. But now we're just very subtly going through and kind of smoothing out some of the tonal variations in her skin to make it look that much better. We're going to click OK. And that, to me, I think should just about cover the color portion of our frequency separation. Next, let's move into the texture portion. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to only work on the texture layer, and we're basically only going to affect this texture that happens here. Anything that I do in the texture layer will not actually affect these color gradients that I've created underneath. So basically, all I have to do is just smooth out a little bit of this. We can do a little bit of clone stamping. We can kind of remove some of these flyaway hairs and get a really nice looking edit without affecting the color information that lives on the layer beneath. So let's grab our clone stamp tool, which is right about here. Clone stamp on the keyboard shortcut. S is the keyboard shortcut for clone stamp. I'm going to put my opacity in at about 35%. I typically don't like retouching skin at a full 100%. And basically all we're going to do is we're going to go around and just get rid of a couple of these little baby blemishes. So I'm going to hold down the Option key, and that basically turns my cursor into a target point. And what the clone stamp does is I can target an area of smooth skin, say right here. I'm going to click right there, and then I can move up and then basically apply that smooth area to this new area inside the circle. So when I click, the target appears, and I let go. Basically, it's telling me that this target is being applied to that new location. And as I kind of click a little bit, all that little spot disappears. So we've just created a nice smooth section there. So I'm going to go and target a little bit over here. It's kind of a little baby blemish right there. There's a little tiny one right here. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. There's a little baby one right here. Let's try to get rid of that. These flyaway hairs, they can be a little bit annoying, especially when you shoot outdoors. They tend to just kind of happen. And unless you have a hair and makeup artist on site, sometimes we don't always notice that we're getting a little bit of flyaway going. But again, that's what our clone stamp is going to be for. So I'm going to kind of target along this range right here and try to apply this smooth section of skin over to that hair right there. Go down here, get some of that. And as you can see, the hair is disappearing, and I'm not affecting the color information underneath. Now, some of her skin is starting to get a little bit too smooth. I've kind of overdone it. I've basically eradicated all of the texture in her skin, and I've effectively airbrushed Ashley. So we're gonna go back and fill in a little bit of that texture a little bit later on once we kind of go through and smooth out a little bit more of these areas here. Just want to be careful with your clone stamp. Don't overdo it, and you want to try to take your sample area from different places. Don't just hammer away from the exact same location. So a little bit here, a little bit there. That should really kind of, we're using her natural skin to rebuild a smoother texture. Get in there and let's go up on her forehead. Get a couple of these areas. Again, Ashley has really great skin. There's not a whole lot of reason to go over the top with these edits. A little bit here, we can kind of come through. Still got a little bit of a highlight on her nose. We'll fix that when we start getting into our tonality. A little bit, I'm gonna make that brush smaller. You can make your clone stamp brush bigger or smaller using the left and right bracket keys on your keyboard. Left makes it smaller, right makes it bigger. Oh, I've actually just activated the pen tool, so let's hit the S key on the keyboard, go back to our clone stamp. Another thing I forgot to mention earlier, we want to make sure that we're only working on the current layer. Photoshop gives you a bunch of different options when you're clone stamping. You can stamp the current layer, you can stamp the current layer and below, you can stamp all layers. Let's look at what happens if I accidentally click on current and below and I try to use this for frequency separation. I'm starting to get, whoa, weirdness, what is going on there? So if you get weirdness in your frequency separation stamping section, just make sure that you are set to current layer only. So let's Command Z those weird stamps out of there. And now we're back to normal. We're gonna go to current layer only. And that makes sense because we're effectively only working on this texture layer and we're not wanting to have our clone stamp dig into these other layers below, especially the color layer. All right, so that actually looks pretty good. I'm gonna go through and just retouch a couple other little tiny spots here. There's a little baby tiny spot in the corner of her nose, but this is starting to look like a really nice, really natural edit because again, we're using Ashley's natural skin texture to sort of rebuild the smoothness in her face. Now we got a little bit airbrushy over in this section because I went a little crazy trying to get rid of that massive flyaway hair, but that's okay because we can actually put a little bit of skin texture back into her face. And let's go ahead and jump into that technique right now. I'm going to use my marquee tool right here. I'm gonna draw a selection around Ashley's face. I'm going to do an edit, copy merged. What this is gonna do is it's gonna copy everything that the viewer can see. So all of the layers from your current layer all the way down to the bottom layer, it copies literally everything you've done. It's not just targeting a single layer. So copy merged. This is basically going to give us a chunk of Ashley's face. And we'll deselect that and then we'll basically just paste that back in. So as you can see, we've created a chunk of Ashley's face and we need to line this back up so that it fits perfectly. So I'll drag my opacity down a little bit. We'll try to get her dialed in just perfectly there. There it is. Oh my gosh, she's finally lined up perfectly. Okay, so right now we're gonna call this skin texture. All right, so when we are zoomed in all the way, it does look like the edits that we've made are actually really good. Ashley's got some pretty nice looking skin. It's starting to look a tad bit cloney in this section, and we'll try to work on that in just a minute. But what I want to do is concentrate on this section where we've very clearly airbrushed our way out of that flyaway hair. So what I want to do, let's back up just a little bit, is I want to actually create some noise, and then we're going to make that noise look just like, let's turn this layer back on. I want to make that noise look just like skin texture. So when we add noise, Photoshop basically creates this sort of field of digital snow, as it were. And what we want to do is we want to dial this sort of snow in to where it's roughly what the size of her pores would be in a natural scenario. So let's bring it back right around there. I mean, I would imagine that if that would be right about the size of her pores. So we're going to use Gaussian and we're going to make sure this is monochromatic. I'm going to click OK. Next, I'm going to go back into my filter gallery and I'm going to blur this digital noise using the Gaussian blur. And we only need to do this a very little bit. So I'm going to bring this down to about maybe 1.2 right there. Click OK. And next, this is the weird part, but it gets a little frequency separation-y here in just a second as well. We're going to go to our filter and we're going to go to stylize and we're going to emboss this. Once again, we can start to see the familiar texture where we've basically subtracted the color out of this and we're creating only a texture. These numbers are relatively insignificant. Just make sure you don't overdo it. You can change the angle. I usually like to say the sun is coming from this direction, so we'll kind of angle it from this direction. 4 pixels, you don't need to go much beyond that, 100%. This is basically just kind of creating, again, a texture map of this layer. So we'll click OK. And then over here in our layers palette, we're going to change our blending mode to soft light. And as you can see, what that did is it basically took all of the gray out of our texture layer. It made it translucent, and it made it so we can see through all of the gray, and all we're left with is the texture. So I now have what appears to be kind of a watercolor canvas skin texture right here on Ashley's face. So I'm going to do a reverse mask on this. That layer disappears, and we're going to grab a brush tool and come in at about 30%. This is basically a soft round brush. This is what I use 99% of the time on all my Photoshop stuff. And when I come in here, I can actually paint that skin texture right back into her face. So we're gonna grab some white paint and we're gonna brush a little bit of that skin texture. You can see it coming in right there, and we don't need to do too much because we still have the rest of the texture left in her face. So right there, I've just created, I don't know, call it artificial skin, where we really had to overdo the clone stamping to get that hair out of there. So this is already looking like a pretty nice edit to me. Now if I come up into her nose, I can see it almost looks like we've lost a little bit of skin texture there, so I can brush just a tiny little bit of texture right back into there, just to have a tiny subtle little bit. All right, so I feel like the tones in her skin are looking nice and soft and even. Let's back out one little layer. I'm gonna basically turn all of our edits off so that we can see what we've done so far. So when I turn these layers off, we go back to our original, we can see that her skin is kind of a little blotchy in places. Some of the highlights are popping out a little bit where the sun is sort of kissing the oils on her face. And there are a couple little blemishes, of course, flyaway hairs. And then when we turn our edits back on with these little eyeball keys, you can see that we have done a very subtle edit that just made her skin just soft and beautiful without looking airbrushed like a porcelain doll. So skin typically tends to be the heavy lift when you're doing retouching. So I'm going to back out one little bit there. And what I want to do now is work on some sharpening. I'm going to use the marquee tool, and I'm going to make a selection around just her eye. Well, let's just do her whole face here. I'm going to do a copy merged paste, and that has once again created just a tiny little window of all of our edits that we've created thus far. And we're going to call this sharp. And I'm going to go into my filters once again, down to sharpen, unsharp mask. Now unsharp mask is kind of an old school sharpening tool. A lot of people like to use the smart sharpening and all that kind of stuff. I've always just used unsharp mask because it's been pretty unwavering in its success. So when I click on this, once again, I'm brought up with a dialog box here, and we can kind of navigate our way around. I actually don't really know precisely where that is. Okay, let's get in on her eye. And when I click the preview, basically what unsharp mask does is it looks for areas of contrast and it increases that contrast. So areas around her eye are going to get effectively sharper. Whereas areas of low contrast, her skin, that's going to get sharpened as well, but we don't want that to get sharpened. You don't want to sharpen your skin. You don't want to make your pores more visible. So we're going to sharpen this section here. I have just a basic algorithm that I've been using for years. 106 on the percentage, radius is at 3.4, threshold is at 4. The radius is basically the amount of pixel radius that gets sharpened, and the threshold is kind of a thing that says, hey, let's not precisely sharpen those pixels exactly, let's dial that back just a little bit. Regardless, these numbers have worked for me for the last couple of years, and I pretty much leave these settings alone at this point. So let's click OK. And what we've effectively done is we've sharpened that entire block that we just copy merged. So all of this is sharp, including Ashley's skin. We don't want her skin to be sharp. So let's turn our other layers back on. Again, I'm going to do a reverse mask so that this layer effectively disappears. And what we're going to do now is, again, we're going to grab our brush tool, white paint, 30%, and I'm going to, let's move in here so we can see this effect taking shape. I'm going to paint the sharpening back into her eyes. A little bit here, probably not so much down there because this eye is ever so slightly out of focus. You don't really want to sharpen stuff that's out of focus. I'm gonna come down and sharpen her lips just a tad little bit. So when we turn our layer on and off, here's sharpening off, get a look at her eye, sharpening on, off, and on. All right, that's a little bit of a strong edit, so I'm gonna dial this opacity down to about 80%, so we're not doing the full edit of sharpening. It's easy to over sharpen your files, and they tend to look a little weird once they've been over sharpened. So try to, again, play it subtle on your sharpening. Okay, so for the most part, I think we've moved our pixels around. We've done the full-fledged manipulation of the physical pixels in the file. I don't think that we need to really go too far into moving more pixels around. There are definitely some more hair flyaways that, you know, according to your style, you could go in and try to clean up some of this with some clone stamping and clean up a little bit of this with some cloning. I think for the purpose of this image, we're gonna just stick with some of the fundamentals of frequency separation to really dig in and get that skin nice and perfect. And then the next part, this is my favorite part actually, is we're gonna paint with light using adjustment layers to really dial in the mood of the image. So let's go back over to our layers palette, and I'm going to go down here and use an adjustment layer. Now, adjustment layers are basically algorithms that we apply to the image. They don't cost a lot as far as RAM or file size, so they're actually very, very efficient to use. The curves is probably the most practical layer that you will find. Basically, this gives you essentially a tone curve. And if I grab down at the bottom, I can kind of affect my darks. You can see the tone curve coming down here. As I move down, we're kind of making the image darker. If we go up here and come up, we are affecting the highlights. The highlights are getting brighter. And the beauty of a tone curve is that it creates a algorithm which is a little bit more parabolic. That is, we have a nice curve rather than a sharp level. All right, so in this first curve adjustment, what I want to do is kind of create sort of a darker tone that we can paint in and make Ashley's environment a little darker. So that might be a little much. Let's bring it right down here. I'm effectively just changing the exposure at this point. I'm making the image darker. So we'll click OK, and I'm going to name this dark. Next, I am going to reverse this image. Right now, every adjustment layer that you create, this is the adjustment layer right here, and it comes with its own mask already built in. So if I do a Command I to inverse that mask, right now you can see that the mask is white, which means that the entire effect has been painted into the document. If I hit Command I reverse that, and now the entire layer has been masked off. So I can now use my brush tool. I'm going to come over here, grab my brush tool, and I'm going to use a right bracket to increase the size of this. And now I can effectively paint this dark light into my image as much as I want. So I am again at 30%. That seems to be pretty good. So let's just kind of start painting some of this darkness in over the rest of our image. I'm going to go back behind Ashley a little bit here. I'm going to come down this way a little bit. And as you can see, as I paint this darkness in and around her, she really pops out. Just a few little brush strokes of a darker curves adjustment really makes a difference. I'm going to turn this layer off so we have kind of a flat looking image where all the light is roughly the same. When I turn the layer on, we really start to see a lot more dynamic shift in the tone, and it makes the image look almost a little bit more 3D, and it definitely helps Ashley to pop out a little bit more. So again, she's got dark hair. So the next adjustment I'm going to make, I'm going to once again go to my curves, because it is probably the most versatile of these tools because it helps us to shape the tonality of the image. I'm going to do just the opposite. I'm going to grab this and bring the tone curve up just a little bit because I want to be able to paint a little bit of brightness into her hair. Her hair tends to really soak up a lot of shadow and get lost to the viewer. So this one we're going to call Bright. Once again, I'm going to click on its built-in mask. I'm going to hit Command I to inverse that mask so that all of that effect will go away. And now when I use my white paint, I can mask in, or basically paint with light. And I can paint a little bit of information in her hair. Not too much. She's starting to get some stringy flyaways, and we don't want to draw too much attention to that. But we'll bring in a little bit extra over here, a little bit extra over there. And since we have, in fact, created a brightness layer, I can zoom in here. I can come in nice and tight. Let's make our brush a little bit smaller, and let's paint a little bit of extra brightness into these eyes just to make them kind of pop a little bit more. Tiny little bit into the whites, not too much. You don't want to overdo the eyes. Human beings are very, very familiar with eyes, and if you over edit someone's eyes, people are gonna know it. So when we turn this layer on and off, a little bit of punch in the eyes, a little bit of punch into the hair, so that's on. Again, that looks like a pretty good edit to me. Let's zoom back out and see what else this image needs. All right, next I'm looking at some skin tones. I feel like modern cameras tend to oversaturate raw images. They tend to provide a little bit too much color information. So fortunately, color is actually very easy to extract out of an image. So I'm gonna go back up to the top of my adjustment layers here, and let us grab yet another adjustment layer, and we're gonna go to black and white. Now basically, what this does is it creates a black and white adjustment layer at the top of my layers, and this is affecting everything beneath it. So it's turned the entire image black and white. This actually looks pretty good black and white, but we're not gonna make this a black and white image. We're just gonna use this to target Ashley's skin tones and paint a little bit of the color out of her skin. So black and white is a really powerful tool because basically what this is doing is it's using the color information in the file and converting it to tone. So if I drag the reds down, basically I am using the red color in the file to affect the tonality of the reds. So I can target different things. I can kind of target the yellows. You can see the wall is made up of a lot of yellow when I move this curve around. When I move the greens around, there's very little green color information in this file. So the green color tonal curve is almost negligible. The same is going to be true of aqua, purple, and so forth. All right, so I'm going to, basically what I want to do is I want to just extract a little bit of color out of Ashley's face. But before we do that, we want to make sure that we're not making her too dark. She kind of looks like she's got a massive, insane sunburn. And we want to make sure she's not too bright so that she, once again, looks like a vampire. So there are a lot of reds and oranges and yellows that a camera uses to make up skin tones. So let's just dial this red in to where it actually looks about right in black and white. And we'll dial this yellow in just up a little bit more. Let's bring the reds up just a little bit more. Okay, so basically what I've done is I've created a black and white image. Now I'm going to go and change the opacity of this adjustment layer right here to, let's call it 12%. So basically what we've just done is we've made this image 12% black and white. I've removed 12% of the color. When I toggle this on and off, when I toggle this off, watch, we get a lot more color saturation. When I turn it back on, there's less color saturation. I feel like this is a little bit easier on the eyes. I've extracted a little bit of color out of Ashley's skin. Again, I think modern cameras pump a little bit too much color into the image, and we want to be able to take that down just a little bit because there's nothing worse than oversaturated skin. Now what I can do is I can use, again, every adjustment layer comes with a built-in mask, so I can use my brush tool. And instead of using white paint, we're gonna switch to black paint. I'm gonna make my brush nice and big. I'm gonna go to 100% power, and I'm going to actually brush the black and white out of the rest. So I should be getting full color in the rest of my scene. You can see the yellow wall kind of starting to pop back out a little bit there. Let's bring back her dress a little bit. So basically at this point, if we look at our mask, there's kind of a section over here where our black and white is affecting only Ashley's skin tones. And so again, if I turn this on and off, full color just in her skin, turn it on, and those skin tones tend to dial down with a little bit of subtlety. All right, so this image is really starting to shape up nicely. We've made some beautiful retouches to the skin. They're simple, they're natural. We've created even more of a shallow depth of field by going into the backdrop over here and darkening this down. Our nice soft backdrop has gotten darker. This has given our image kind of a 3D quality to it. Ashley is popping out nicely. She's making a beautiful connection with the viewer with this eye contact. We've got nice bright catch lights in her eyes, beautiful skin retouching, and a little bit of light painting going on around the outsides to make her really pop out. So I think this image is really close to being done. There's only one tiny little thing that I'm gonna add at the end here, and that's yet another curves adjustment. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to bring the highlights up, and I'm gonna bring the darks down. And this has created effectively an S curve. You can see the highlights coming up here, and the midtones, they kind of go down through a neutral zone, and then the darks come down. Let's make this even more drastic so it looks more like an S. An S curve basically provides this smooth, beautiful parabolic contrast to your image. Now this is just to show what the S looks like. Let's ease back on those edits there and those edits there. Okay, so now as you can see, I've basically kind of done a hot burn on the image. This edit is way too powerful. My highlights have gone up way too far and my darks have gone down way too far. It gives the image a sense of false color saturation. So this is obviously a little bit too much. So we're gonna leave this edit as it is, and I'm just gonna go back over onto the layers palette, and I'm gonna dial that opacity all the way down to about, I'll call it 20%, give or take. And what that's gonna do is that's gonna give it just a tiny little pop of contrast at the end there. So this is off, this is a little bit flat, this is on, and we get that tiny little pop of contrast. I feel like that's maybe a little bit too strong, so let's dial this edit down just a little bit more like that at 18%. And that to me looks like a pretty good edit. When we go over into this section here, let's take a look at our original. I'm gonna turn all of the adjustment layers off. So this is our original. As you can see, it's a little bit flat, and we've got some kind of flyaway hairs and some skin tone variations going on in Ashley's face. And when I apply all of my adjustments, boom, look at that. We've got this beautiful soft image with razor sharp eyes, perfect skin tones, and this dreamy high contrast appearance that's not over the top, but it's still subtle enough, and we've created a really magical looking image. So this is about where I would end with my editing process. I would consider this file to be just about done. Now again, you could really go in and clean up some of the flyaway hairs, and I think that's just some basic clone stamping. I don't really want to get too far into that to make these lessons end up being hours long, but I would consider this to be a really good edit on this image. So next we need to archive this image and save it to our database. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit Command S, and I'm going to save this Photoshop document. So now my Photoshop document has all of these layers affiliated with it. Anytime that I go back and open this document, I have access to all of my edits. And if a client says, hey, I need you to go back and clean up all those flyaways, well, I still have all of this raw data that I can work with. So our Photoshop document is still intact and all of its layers are intact. You want to make sure that you always save all of your layers. I've seen a lot of photographers who flatten the image at the end of the day and they lose all of their edits, and they basically smush all of that information down into their original and they lose their original file. That's really bad. Don't do that. So we're going to hit save. We're going to save our original Photoshop document. Next, I am going to flatten this image. We're going to go to Layer, Flatten Image, and now basically I have created a single layer, a single original file with all of the edits. I no longer have access to any of my cool edits that I've done, which is why at this point we are going to do a File, Save As. And we're going to save this as a TIFF file. Let's go back up into Ashley here. This is my TIFF archive. So TIFF files are very large format, non-compressed, archival, fine art files. Ooh, say that 3 times fast. So let's go with TIFF. Let's click save. And we want to make sure there's no compression. I like an interleveled layer there, and then I'm on a Macintosh, so it just makes sense for me to leave that there. Click OK. And now we have a flattened TIFF file. Next, I'm going to do save as again. File, save as. And now we're going to save this as a JPEG. A JPEG is a very universal file format that just about any computer, tablet, or smartphone can read. And so it's a good way to move your files around and share them with clients. You don't necessarily need to send your clients huge archival TIFF files because their file size is really too big to email or do anything else with. So we're going to save this as a JPEG. We're going to keep maximum quality. I like baseline optimized, maximum quality on the file size, click OK. That saves as a full-size JPEG. Next, I am going to go to image size. We're going to come over here and we're actually going to shrink this image down. So when I have the resample tab selected, basically means that I am in fact going to shrink this file and destroy pixels. So this file will now become permanently smaller. So let's target our resolution at 72 dpi. This is going to be basically a screen-sized file. I like 3600 pixels wide. That basically gives me kind of a nice thing that fits into most HD stuff. It looks great on iPhone, it looks great on tablets, and it looks pretty good on computer screens too. So let's click OK, and when we do this, we're going to see the file actually physically shrink rather drastically. So now when I zoom in, this is my full-size file rather than that really super gigantic file. It's still pretty big, and it's good enough for me to email to a client or text to somebody or to put on a smartphone or a tablet if you want to be able to keep your portfolio in your pocket. And now I'm once again going to do a save as, and I'm going to call this the same file, only now we're going into the HD for high definition. High definition is basically a smaller format from our big 8,000 pixel raw 5DSR 50 megapixel file. So I'm going to put the moniker HD at the end of this, and we're going to save this file. Once again, let's just go with maximum quality here. It is in fact a smaller file, but that should be a little bit more manageable for us to be able to send around the internet. You can share it with clients, you can share it with friends, you can send this file as a text message, and we've always been very careful to save as each of these iterations. So if I go back to my old Photoshop document that I started working on, it does in fact still contain all of its layers. We did flatten that file, and then we did save as a TIFF. So the original layered Photoshop document is still intact, and if I open it right now, I still have access to all my layers. So make sure that you're very careful in your saving process. Don't end up flattening your file and then save that Photoshop document accidentally to where you've lost all of your layered information. Okay, so that is a pretty good start to our editing section. We've done some great skin retouching. I feel like this is a beautiful image. It looks natural. It doesn't look retouched really at all. Her skin is smooth and beautiful without looking airbrushed. It still contains a lot of her actual skin texture. As you can see there, she is still in fact a human being and not an airbrushed porcelain doll. We have beautiful sharpness in her eyes. There's beautiful sharpness along her lips. Once again, we've created the illusion of depth with a very adept and simple light painting to get that out of focus backdrop kind of really dropping off there and have Ashley pop out in the screen. So I'm really happy with this edit. Again, there are endless things that you could probably still do to this file to reshape it into a magazine quality beauty file, but I don't want to belabor this tutorial any longer than it already is. We have lots of other Photoshop tutorials to get to. I'm excited to get started on them, and we'll see you in the next lesson.